Today's video is on the Devourer of Gods theme from Terraria Calamity by DM Dokuro. Now, this might seem like an odd topic on my channel, considering that I usually talk about Japanese video game music, but I think it's worth talking about this particular piece simply because DM Dokuro clearly has an understanding of Japanese composition, and I think that his theme here is very relevant to what we've been talking about recently. And I'd normally not trust a Western composer to talk about Japanese composition, but this is the one exception. I mean, some people might think of Toby Fox as someone who sort of understands Japanese composition, but I don't really think that that's true. I think that Toby Fox mainly is just imitating the style and doesn't fully understand the style. So today we're going to be talking about a composer who is more competent at writing in a Japanese style, probably the most competent in the US. If you haven't heard this theme, I mean, it's legendary for the people who have heard it. This is the Scourge of the Universe theme. And it starts out with this wonderful little that's just a tonic function introduction, setting the stage for this. Now that's an extremely colorful chord progression. So what's going on here? Well, we have a 5-2 regression. So usually a red chord is not going to go back to a blue chord. But right at the beginning of the piece, we have 1 chord moving to a 5 chord, moving to a 2 chord, and then moving to flat 2. This is a very odd way to start a piece. It doesn't really make much sense in terms of functional harmony, so something else must be going on. And just like always, it's isochronously shifting mode. So in this case, we have Aeolian mode twice. This one's also Aeolian mode, but then we go to a much brighter Ionian mode. And then to Phrygian. Now, is it possible to repeat a interval of time in isochronously shifting mode? Well, the answer to that is, well, here it is. Here is an interval of time that was doubled up, right? So you have Aeolian twice, and then it goes to Ionian and then Phrygian. So you don't necessarily have to always move to a different mode every interval of time. You can just craft a progression that is satisfying and not think too hard about keeping each interval of time its own sort of unit. But I mean, he does, right? Because the 1 chord and the 5 chord are sort of unique sounding things. He moves very far away from each other with that movement. And you notice there's something going on in the bass here. 1, 5, 2, which are all a perfect fourth away from each other. That's what kind of makes the logic work, even though he's staying on the same mode for the first 2 chords. Now I want to talk about this 2 chord. See this 2 chord? This is the most important chord. And it's the most important chord in the entire piece because it implies a slide progression. And we've talked about this slide progression, the slide with the double retardation, but he's doing something a little bit different. He's doing a slide progression with the double retardation, but he's only resolving one of the retardations. Which kind of gets you this chord right here, and you might think, oh yeah, that's the Terraria Calamity sound. It also sounds like, Chrono Trigger, like the... That's To Faraway Times, the credits theme from Chrono Trigger. All of these pieces have a similar sound to them. Well, this little trick that he's using is doing a double retardation, but only resolving the lower retardation. So you don't resolve this one. You just kind of leave it unresolved. And when you're doing this sort of thing, like a slide with a double retardation and only resolving one of them, it actually doesn't change the chord. That's why I just put a Roman numeral 2 for both of those chords, because all it is a really, really colorful 2 chord. I know it sounds like it's more complicated than that, but it's really just a 2 chord with a double suspension, and he only resolves one of them. I wish there was some easier way to think about it, but there's actually not. This is actually the easiest way to think about this progression. And then, as we can see, we're utilizing this double retardation without the upper retardation being resolved. So to play it in context, here's the 2 retardations, and he's only going to resolve the lower one. And then this kind of voice leads really nicely to the flat 2 chord, which, I mean, he does, and it's brilliant. You could actually not resolve this. You could not resolve the retardation again and go. Which I feel like he does that somewhere in the soundtrack, like maybe with the main theme or something. We'll talk about the main theme a different day, is what I'm saying. Well, he's using not a flat 6/6 slide progression, but a flat 2/2 slide progression. So to kind of play them all in succession, here's 6/6. Here's flat 2/2. And here's flat 3/3. That's very fun to do that out of context. But as we can see here, flat 2 moving to 2 is a very different sound. He's doing it backwards though. He's going from 2 to flat 2. And this is an important thing to understand about slides. Slides are not functional progressions, and as a result, you can go backwards. You can do a slide progression and then go in the opposite direction, right? You don't have to go flat 2/2. You can go 2 flat 2. And it's actually, in this case, more functionally coherent to go 2 flat 2. Because 2 is a predominant chord and flat 2 is a dominant chord. So it makes more sense to go 2 flat 2, which he does. As we can see, flat 2 being dominant and 2 being predominant, he actually goes in the opposite direction, starting with 2 and going to flat 2, which is still a slide progression. It's just reversing the order. It still gives you the same sound regardless of which direction you go. So now let's take a look at where we go after that. This is the A section, or at least like he's hinting at the A section. He's playing kind of the beginning of the A section. So I'm going to play both the introduction and this first statement of the A section in total, in full, so that you can appreciate it. So the first thing we should talk about is this movement right here. So he goes from 1 to 5 and then up to flat 6. This is our Aeolian deceptive cadence progression. 1, 5, and then 5 is going to resolve not back to 1, but it's going to resolve to flat 6, which is a deceptive cadence to flat 6. So he immediately starts out with a deceptive cadence progression. And then he walks up 4 da da 5 da 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 6 da da 7. And then, 7 5 1. That's your Ito cadence there, which I didn't put in. I probably should have put the graphic for the Ito cadence. I'll do it when I edit it. And this is a hybrid predominant dominant chain. Where we have blue, red, blue, red. A predominant dominant chain is always blue, red, which this is in this case. But because it's preceded by a deceptive cadence progression, we actually start out green, red, and then blue, red, blue, red. So it's just blue, red. It's just red, blue, red, blue, red, blue, red, blue all the way through. You could call it just a series of predominant dominants just throughout this entire first line, which is sort of the identity of the A section. The A section is about blue, red, blue, red, blue, red, blue, red. That sort of pattern. Moving on to the B section, we have which is a great pre-chorus section to like a rock song. And we get these hybrid predominant dominant chains from the A section. So he's building on this idea. Four, 5, flat 6, flat 7, and then he does it again. But instead of resolving the predominant dominant chain, he moves to this chord, which is minor flat 7. Minor flat 7 is a chord that we haven't really talked about that much on this channel, but it has some interesting interactions with tonicizations and also with Phrygian mode. The B minor 7 here is a good example of this use of the 2-5-1 of flat 6, right? Because if we're in a minor key, if we move to minor flat 7, we could use that as the 2 of flat 6 and resolve to flat 6 by just doing a 2-5-1. This is a very common tactic in Japanese game music, and especially Japanese pop music. It's an incredibly popular one that we've talked about before. If you go watch the Keep Your Faith video, the Throw Your Mask Away video from Persona 5, that one actually has this going on in it. And as you know, that if you watch that video, there's a lot of little things about this progression that make it sort of difficult to describe. In this instance, we're sitting on that 2 of flat 6. And that kind of makes it sound a little bit less like a 2 of flat 6. Now, you don't need the 5 chord in a 2 of flat 6. See this text up here that says the 5 chords in parentheses may be omitted with no difference in effect. Well, DM Dokuro did not put the 5 chord. I mean, he could have. It would have sounded like this. Isn't that so much worse? What it does is it makes it feel more like a 2 and less like a dark Phrygian minor flat 7 chord. Right? When you leave out the 5, it makes it sound more like a dominant function chord, like a minor flat 7 chord, like a true minor flat 7 chord, which is why I labeled the B minor 7 as dominant in this instance. It's because normally a 2-5-1 of flat 6 will be half of the harmonic rhythm. But in this instance, it's actually double the harmonic rhythm, which makes this not really sound much like a 2 of flat 6. Instead, it just sounds like a really dark chord. Minor flat 7 is an important thing to the identity of DM Dokuro's Calamity soundtrack. If we start in C minor, right, then these would be our primary chords. And then these would be our secondary chords, the ones borrowed from E flat major. Which sound a little bit more sweet, as I've mentioned in the past. But then we're going to go one step further, and we're going to take those minor secondary chords, and we're going to go to the parallel of that key, which gives us these wacky chords. Which sound very dark. In fact, they sound even darker than the flat 2 chord or the flat 5 chord or the flat 1 chord. There's something uniquely dark about the minor parallel secondary chords. And this is a important thing because when trying to understand Dokuro's music, you need to understand that he's borrowing from these minor parallel secondary chords to show evil intent. This is a frequent thing that happens throughout the soundtrack, where it's used in the Plaguebringer Goliath theme, for example. He's borrowing from the minor parallel secondary chords, and a couple other tracks in the game. It's meant to represent evilness, which is actually something that comes from film music, because like other composers have figured this out a long time ago. This is just using this old strategy of using the minor parallel secondary chords to depict evil. You could say it's a cliche at this point. An interesting relationship that goes further than just the sound of these dark chords is the minor third relation between E flat minor and C minor. And this is used elsewhere in the soundtrack, but we'll talk about that in future videos. Now, if we want to understand why this B minor 7 chord is really dominant, it's because it's used in the context of a lament. Except this lament doesn't have a 1 chord, and the flat 7 is a minor flat 7, and the 5 is a minor 5. It's a very, very altered lament progression, but it is still a lament progression. And then you can resolve here, right? It makes sense. You have 1, minor flat 7, flat 6, 5, 1. It's just a very dark sounding lament. An interesting quality about this progression is it's actually more in E minor than it is in C sharp minor. It's actually more in E minor than it is in C sharp minor, which, I mean, my chords in this diagram are written in C minor, so it would be E flat minor in this case. But if we're in E flat minor, the chords in this diagram would be B flat minor, flat 6, which would become major 4, and the minor 3 chord of E flat minor, which would be borrowed from the parallel E flat major. So the progression would sound like 5, 4, 3 in E flat minor, which is odd because a minor 3 chord in E flat minor is not the most common situation in music. But if you compare that to the chords in C minor, like this would be minor flat 7, this would be flat 6, and this would be minor 5, then you realize that you have only single mixture going on in E flat minor, but you have double mixture going on in C minor, which means that the progression is actually more in E flat minor than it is in C minor. This doesn't really mean anything. It's just a cool phenomenon that the functional map allows you to analyze. This progression is so dark that it's actually more in a key, a minor third above, than it is in the key that you started in. And then we get this. Which feels like weirdly bright all of a sudden. And if you thought that, then you would be right, because it's isochronously shifting mode. And it's actually the same isochronously shifting mode from the beginning, moving from Aeolian so it does Aeolian twice, and then it goes to Ionian, and then we get our 5 chord, which kind of breaks the isochronously shifting mode, because it's just a 2 going to 5, which is rather functional. But compare that to the isochronously shifting mode at the beginning of the piece. We have where we have Aeolian twice, and then we have the 2 chord, which is Ionian, and then it moves to Phrygian. Well, we don't have Phrygian the second time, but we do have the double Aeolian moving to Ionian. So he's kind of borrowing this isochronously shifting mode from before, but he's changing the chords. I mean, before we had 5 to 2, now he has 4 to 2, which is like the Chrono Trigger progression. And also realize that he has halved the harmonic rhythm. So right, that's 2 measures every single mode. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, right? But the second time we have only 1. 1, 1, 1, and then we get the 5 chord. So he has halved the harmonic rhythm from the first presentation of isochronously shifting mode in the piece. And look at this. We talked about how the identity of the A section is this blue-red, blue-red, blue-red situation. But look at how much blue-red is going on here. We have blue, red, blue, red, red, blue, red, blue, blue, red. So it's just all blue and red, kind of leading up to the resolution of the pre-chorus. So this pre-chorus is blue, red, which is building up tension. It's building up momentum for the resolution to this 1 chord, which is the beginning of the true A section. And the true A section goes something like this. So in this one, we have a sort of similar thing to what's going on in the B section. And then we get a tonic function chord. In the A section we have this is where the tonic function chord is here. So it's kind of like shifted over one, but we have different underlying progressions going on. We kind of have an inverted lament. So we have da, ba, 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 da, 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 da. That is the one chord moving to 5, and then 5 deceptively moves up to flat 6, which then moves to flat 7. So we have 5, flat 6, flat 7, almost like it wants to go up to 1, but it doesn't. It goes to 4. And then we get 4, da, na, na. And this movement from 4 to 3, 6 is a little bit similar to 4, 1, 6, but moving in the opposite direction to another tonic function chord. So from the 4 chord, you could move down to 1, 6, which is a tonic function chord, but you could also move up to 3, 6. And then 3, 6 proceeds to flat 6 to flat 7. And then we get this always dominant diminished chord. You know, diminished chords are always dominant in Japanese music. So this progression is a lot like a inverted lament as well. We have the 3, 6. This chord is very similar to a 5 chord in the key. Here's a 5 chord, and here's a 3, 6. They both have the same bass note. That's why it kind of works. But the nice thing about the flat 3 chord is that it feels brighter and sweeter. I mean, listen to this section. That 3 chord makes it feel so intimate and sweet. It feels so sweet because of that 3 chord. It's really nice. And as we can see here, he's changing the 5 to a 3 chord in order to voice lead smoother to get up. And it results in a very sweet sounding progression because, as I've talked about before, the secondary chords like flat 3 and flat 6 and flat 7, which we're using all of those chords in this instance, lead to a sweeter sounding phrase. And then in the second half of the A section, he uses a chromatic lament, but he actually skips position 2. So he goes, you go 1, 5, 6 to 4, 6, but a major 4, 6, not a minor 4, 6. And then he goes down to root position to do this walk down to flat 2, which is very fun. And then the next thing that happens is really cool. Do you remember how we talked about 2, 5, 1 of flat 6 and how you can omit the middle chord? Well, that's what he's doing here, but he's not doing it with 2 of flat 6. He's doing it with 4 of flat 6, which is flat 2. So he's going ba na na na. And this time it has the right harmonic rhythm to be predominant. Because in this instance, the 4 of flat 6 is only taking up 1 unit of harmonic rhythm. So the harmonic rhythm determines the context of whether it's going to be dominant or predominant. If you sit on the 2 of flat 6 for long enough, it just feels like a minor flat 7 chord. If you only sit on it for 1 harmonic rhythm, then it's going to feel like a predominant chord. And if you do the 2, 5, 1 of flat 6, you have to do it at half the harmonic rhythm. I know that sounds complicated, but this is sort of a natural phenomenon of if you sit on something for long enough, it's going to lose its identity and turn into something else. Well, this tonicization of flat 6 is very finicky, and DM Dokuro understands it because you can see that he uses it in different contexts. This section is sweeter, this true A section is sweeter than the pre-chorus. The pre-chorus is more intense. This section is more lyrical. It's so singable. It's such a singable melody. It's such a sweet sounding progression with a really, really lyrical melody, as opposed to right? The A section feels more intimate, while the pre-chorus feels like a standard rock pre-chorus, which is supposed to build energy for the very lyrical chorus. I mean, it's just good rock music writing. This is what we're dealing with. And then after we resolve from the on the one chord at the end of the true A section, we get this. We get 1 minor flat 7, 1 minor flat 7. That's a 1 minor flat 7 vamp. And a 1 minor flat 7 vamp is extremely dark. And then it goes back to the pre-chorus. And then we land on the solo section. This solo section is meant to intimidate you. This section has the progression from the introduction. But this progression is kind of DM Dokuro showing off, which, because it uses this complicated isochronously shifting mode, it's supposed to represent this powerful, beyond your comprehension being, which is the Devourer of Gods. The Devourer of Gods is an incredibly tricky, difficult to understand, eldritch being from another universe that constantly tries to intimidate you. I mean, he talks to you. He talks your language and tries to intimidate you during the fight, which is great because it shows you how much of an ego that the Devourer of Gods has. And this sort of ego that he has is shown through the music using isochronously shifting mode. It's supposed to be intimidating. And then he does this thing right here, which is a slide progression moving from flat 2 to 2, which is the opposite direction than he did at the beginning of the piece. And then we get the 5 chord, and then move on to this section is supposed to be lower energy, especially after that section which was meant to kind of freak you out and intimidate you. This feels like really, really contrasting. This progression is flat 6, flat 7, 1 over a tonic pedal. Flat 7, 1, and he does the 2-3 retardation. And then flat 6, flat 7, 1. And then we get a 1 flat 6 of 4, a Toho modulation. And then he goes back by moving to this chord. Baba and then he does this again. This 1 flat 6 of 4 is pretty interesting because usually a 1 flat 6 of 4 will go from flat 6, flat 7 to 1, and then the 1 will become 5, and then it'll move to flat 6, and then that will become the new flat 6, and then it'll be flat 6, flat 7, 1. But this case, instead of moving to flat 7, he moves to 5, 5, 7, minor 5. So it sounds like na, 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 and then he could go da, na, but he doesn't. He goes na, 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 which is a cool kind of variation on the 1 flat 6 of 4. And then he moves back to the 1 chord of C sharp minor, so then he can go. And one other thing about the 1 flat 6 of 4 is that he resolves to a suspended chord, not a fully resolved chord. So and then he never resolves it to here. He resolves it to here, which is weird, right? We were expecting, if it was a real true 1 flat 6 of 4, it would go. But he doesn't, he goes here. He kind of gives up on the 1 flat 6 of 4 there, which brings him back to the original key. So this time we don't have a pedal. This time we don't have a pedal. We just get flat 6, flat 7, 1. And then we get that chromatic lament thing from before, where we go to a 4-chord. Actually, so a 4-chord is interesting here because it's just a functional substitute, right? A flat 6 chord is predominant function and 4 is predominant function. So all he did is you go to that 4, similar to how you can move to 4/6 in a chromatic lament, and then he does a predominant dominant chain at the end. It's the same one. It's the hybrid one. The hybrid one is kind of diatonic to like a key if you take into account modal mixture. We get our 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7. And then we have to resolve that there, right? Which he does. So this is a thing that is used in a bunch of boss themes from Calamity. I mean, it's just flat 6, flat 7, 1 over a tonic pedal. It's the same thing that we just talked about. That's kind of the identity of the C section. This whole section is about flat 6, flat 7, 1 and tonic pedals. And then here we have flat 2, 1, and then we go to minor flat 7. But it's not just our normal minor flat 7. He adds 5 there as well. So it actually ends up being a half diminished chord. But it's basically the same as minor flat 7. Minor flat 7 and 5 half diminished 6, 5 are very similar sounding progressions. And then from there, he moves down to A flat. Almost like that 2 of flat 6 tonicization. And then we get our final thing here, which is a minor third grid progression. Now, we haven't talked about the minor third grid in a long time, but the minor third grid is a way to order harmony in rock music and in especially Japanese video game music. So here we have flat 6, flat 7, which is blue to red, right? And then he goes down the minor third grid to the next blue to red. And then he goes down the minor third grid to the next blue. And then he in order to go, he doesn't want to go to 3 because that would ruin all of his dark energy that he's building up. So he goes to flat 2. And the 2 to flat 2 is something that we've talked about earlier in the piece. It's kind of this thing that keeps coming back and is also intimidating. It's that slide progression. But then he goes way outside of the context of the minor third grid to flat 5. In a progression that I call the flat 5-5 slide. So unlike a normal slide progression, usually a slide progression goes from a major 7 chord to a minor 7 chord, or from a minor 7 chord to a major 7 chord. But the flat 5-5 slide is a little bit different. It goes from a major 7 chord to a dominant 7 chord. And even though flat 5 is tonic function, when it's used in the context of a flat 5/5 slide, it feels predominant, which is why in this context it doesn't ruin the energy, and even though it's tonic function. The flat 5/5 slide is a context that makes flat 5 feel like a predominant chord, which is why you're allowed to use it in this context, even though it would have destroyed all of our energy. This is a very, very interesting sounding chord. I'm going to play it again just so that you can properly appreciate it. And that is the Devourer of the Gods theme. I know the Terraria Calamity mod just got updated, so this is a pretty good topic to be talking about right now. And I want to thank my brother, who's currently playing the mod, for giving me some footage here. At the end of the video here, I'm showing some footage of his winning run, because he recently just beat the Devourer of the Gods. All of this footage is from his playthrough of Infernum, which is the highest difficulty of Calamity, and you know, it's right after they added the new sprite and everything. So I have played it with him before. I've played the expert mode, so I think expert mode is just as hard, if not harder, than with the rage mechanic, because you don't have the rage mechanic as a crutch. I'm a big fan of the Terraria Calamity mod. I think that the team behind it found some true talent in DM Dokuro. I think that this represents the best of video game music, and that Dokuro is one of the greatest composers of Japanese style music in the US. I think he doesn't deserve enough, he doesn't get enough attention, even though, you know, people love the guy to death. And his music is legendary. Because it's used in a mod of Terraria, you actually don't hear about Dokuro that much, even though he definitely deserves more attention. He needs to be recognized for his work and his incredible understanding of the Japanese idiom in a way that no other Western composer has ever achieved. I have listened to Western music all my life, and I've never heard a composer who properly understands Japanese composition. This is a showing of more knowledge than is ever necessary to understand this sort of music. But wait, there's more. I want to talk about a little bit of Universal Collapse. I will put the rest of the chord chart for Universal Collapse up on the database after I upload this video, so you can buy the chart if you want. With all my other charts, you just pay one price and you get every single chart from my channel. I take a lot of time to produce these things, but let's talk about Universal Collapse for just a second. So Universal Collapse is very similar to Scourge of the Universe. It has almost all the same things, but it has this awesome introduction that is a lot like the thing from the Route 23 video, where, you know, flat 7 7 and then the na na. That's the way it was done in the Route 23 video. That's the way that Go Ichinose did it. But here he doesn't do that at all. He just has a rest, where he just does all the chords in a row, where he goes flat 6, flat 7 becomes the new flat 6, and then he goes to flat 7, which I'm going to call this, because it happened twice, I'm going to call this strategy the flat 6, flat 7 elision. It's such a cool effect, and it's the best part of Universal Collapse. That starts off, and it's the hypest part of the entire battle. Another thing that happens in Universal Collapse is the breakdown section, the thing that has the intro progression is repeated over and over and over and over again because it's the most intimidating part of the entire piece. And with the isochronously shifting mode at the front, you know, you're now forced to deal with that isochronously shifting mode over and over and over again, which is great for like the final climactic part of the fight. It's actually funny. Other composers have, I think, copied this. The final boss fight against Calamity Ganon. Funny how Calamity Ganon's boss fight uses the same trick, where there's like isochronously shifting mode, and they just repeat that part over and over and over and over again right before you get the final shot off. It's like, it's such a great moment. Well, this is like the first time that happened. I don't know if he stole that idea from Dokuro, or they just kind of both had the same idea around the, I don't know. DM Dokuro was first by a long shot, but it's cool that both of those things happened at a similar time. Well, I hope that this was interesting. I know that this was a lot of information. This was a long video, but it had to be a long video because this is a really complicated subject, and this is what's required to understand Dokuro. Now, in the coming week, I'm going to be posting my Q&A video, and that'll be really nice. It'll be a change of pace, something different. And a lot of the questions are going to come from the comment section, the Discord. Some people have asked questions on the Discord. If you want to go onto my Ko-Fi and look at those charts that I mentioned, those are there, and you can go take a look at those. All of my diagrams are also there, and you can purchase those. I think this is pretty good for now. I guess I'll see you not in 2 weeks, but soon enough for the next Q&A video. And thank you so much for watching. Good evening.